All right. Well, we're live on Facebook, and I'm going to post this on our Facebook page, and then also on our we're going to post it on our website as well. So be sure to let folks know if they need to access it on there. So, all right, Natasha, got your book in. That's great. Hope that y'all have, maybe most folks have had a chance to at least look through the first few chapters. We went through the first two chapters last Wednesday, and then this week we're going to go through chapters 3 and 4. Let's see here. I'm going to give everybody just a minute to log on, and we'll get started with the video. And or we'll get started with the lesson, and I'm going to share this on our church Facebook page and also on our website. All right. Good deal. Bridget's got hers. All right. So the format's going to be really similar to what we did last week as far as how we're going through the chapters. I'm going to be sharing a little bit of different information this week, and sharing a couple of resources and everything about some ideas that chapters 3 and 4 talk about. And so this will be a really interesting part of the book, I think, and one that we can learn a lot from. It's like with any other book, there is a little bit of groundwork to cover before you kind of get into the meat of what we're talking about. So really, these first two lessons, session 1 and then tonight with session 2, they are kind of introductory parts of the book, and so that's kind of important to remember. But it's not a hard read, and there's really a lot of good information that's in the first couple of chapters as well about experiencing God at home, and especially in these days of quarantine and social distancing and all the time that you get to spend with your family, good and bad, right? This is a good opportunity to study about and to learn what it means to experience God in our own homes, and how that makes such a big difference in our lives. All right. So like we've mentioned, we're in chapter 3 and 4 with our study and looking at experiencing God at home. And one of the things that's really important is the first couple of chapters. It talks about what life was like in the Blackaby home. And Henry Blackaby is a just extremely influential pastor, author in the Christian community, and has sold many books, but Experiencing God has been, I guess, the one that was most popular, and the one that most people know that he wrote. And it's kind of been a go-to for so many churches as people have wanted to develop their own personal life and cultivate their own spiritual walk with the Lord. What does it mean to really experience the presence of God and to pursue Him, and all that means for our lives? So Henry Blackaby is kind of a staple in the evangelical world, and somebody that many people go back to and listen to preach, and he's a prolific speaker and everything else. So it was interesting, given that context, to read through the first few chapters and to get a little bit of a picture, a glimpse of what it was like to grow up in the Blackaby household. It's like a lot of other households. There are good things, there are bad things, there are There are times when you know you can rejoice, and there are times when you struggle, and there are things that we are quick to share about our families, and there are other things that we are not so quick to share about our families, things that are internal, things that happen within our own ranks. And so we're really talking about these next couple of chapters. We're talking about family dynamics, and for this week and next week, that's going to be a really critical idea into what we're discussing. And every family is different. We know that. We see that, and there are things that every family struggles with, and one particular family may struggle with something differently than another family. But it kind of boils down to the idea that every individual is different, and we all react and respond differently to different circumstances, and so that impacts family dynamics in a very, very real way. And it starts with marriage. It starts with a husband and wife, the tone that's set, the individual personalities that each one of those people bring to the relationship and then bring to a family. Because there's been several times when before we've done a wedding and I've sat down to do premarital counseling and that sort of thing, we talk a great deal about the background that we bring to a marriage as individuals, and how that's gonna change things moving forward. How do you make it work when you have two different individuals that come together to make one unit? The Bible tells us that two become one. They are essentially one flesh, and that's the biblical idea of marriage. And as we start a family, what exactly that means? Well, it means that two individuals who are unique and distinct in so many ways because God created you that way, those two individuals are going to come together and they're going to form something that is one. And that oneness is so critical to the biblical understanding of marriage. That oneness is important to our understanding of family. And in the biblical understanding of a family, how important that really is. So we can't look at this through the lens of the world and the way the world sees these things. We need to look at this biblically to understand how family dynamics should be navigated, and how we do that. Not just survive in family dynamics, but how do you thrive, and how do you grow closer to the Lord as you grow closer together as a family? It's not easy, and there's so many things where we experience struggles in this area. But there's one resource I want to kind of point you to as far as like personality types before we get into the actual book and before we get into the actual study. If you have ever taken a personality test, you'll kind of understand what I'm talking about here. But this is a little bit more of a detailed personality test. It's called an Enneagram, and I don't know if y'all have ever taken this test. If you have taken an Enneagram test, feel free to comment on the comment feed to let us know what type you are. Enneagram basically breaks people down into 9 different types of people. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to post the link to one Enneagram test. You can Google it and you can look at a lot of other different options out there. But the Enneagram basically, like I say, it breaks you down into 9 different types, and it focuses on what your personality is, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are. And this is really, really interesting when you think about the dynamics that you bring to a relationship. That matters. I mean, when we think about a marriage, the visual, the image is an eternal triangle. It's a relationship between you and your spouse, but it's also a relationship between you, your spouse, and God. And so there's an importance to that both of you have something that you're bringing together to the marriage. And in fact, when you have children and when you have family that's growing from that marriage, then your children bring something. They bring an extra dynamic. And man, our kids can have their own personality that in some ways reflects us, in other ways has nothing to do with us. It's just how God gifted them. And our kids can be so different too. So we're going to get to that here in just a little bit. But if we want to grow closer to God in the context of the home, we have to know who we are living with, who we have a family with, who we're married to, in order for that relationship to really thrive. And so I posted a link in there. This is called YourEnneagramCoach.com. Sarah and I have taken this test, and it's pretty spot on if you read it. Y'all have heard the saying, opposites attract, and that's an old saying. But it's true a lot of times. And for whatever reason, God brings opposites together from time to time. Sarah and we have some similarities, but in many ways we are opposite of one another. And it's interesting because of that. Sarah is a type 2. She is a supportive advisor. That's what the Enneagram test labels her as. And type 2s are people who see the world through relationships and define themselves through their service to others. They may be selfless, loving, and giving, or they may be dependent, prideful, and manipulative. And so it kind of walks you through what some of the core fears of a particular type of person are, what their desires are, what they want to see in other people, what they hope to expect from other people. Man, I mean, that's so critically important when we think about the context of the family. Core longing, what they want to see happen in their life. So Sarah's a type 2, a supportive advisor, and I think that's pretty spot on because she is very much a people person, and she loves being around people. This whole quarantine thing is driving her insane, and I know that she loves her family so much, but she wants to be around people. And I'm a type 5. I am the investigative thinker, and type 5 is a person who pulls back from the world and others to observe and prefers to live in their mind. So literally the opposite of a type 2. They may be wise, visionary, knowledgeable, or abstract, stingy, and intellectually arrogant. So again, it will kind of, depending on what your type is, you go through there, you take the test, and it's a free test, but they also sell a product, to help you grow in what that means in your own personality and how you develop. But they'll talk about your core weaknesses, your core desires, and what you want to see in other people. And I like this website in particular because it is fairly Christian based, and they do give examples that help to point to the idea that you are unique in how Christ has made you. Sarah says, a regular conversation here. Let's have a cookout. I would say that. I don't know if I can people today is what I would say. So that's very true. And I would say that at times, the difference between Sarah and I love people too. I mean, when pastoring, you deal with people, but I had a professor in seminary in pastoral counseling who said that for some people, being around others is energizing. It just builds them up. Being around other people is something that they crave, and they leave from being around other people. They leave better equipped, and they're just excited. But for other people, when they're around others, they leave feeling drained. And I mean, honestly, y'all don't get mad at me, all my church folk. I love y'all, but me being around other people, I love it. But what happens is that it's naturally kind of draining to me. And so complete opposite of Sarah, because Sarah she's just energized by being around other folks. And so it's not as if you don't like people in either one of those circumstances or scenarios. It's really just kind of what circumstances are you more conducive to, and what do you like to do? What are the things that you enjoy doing? What are the things that fuel you back up? What helps me, I guess, emotionally and spiritually is spending time with just me and my Bible, and spending time kind of in quiet meditation or whatever. So anyways, it's a really good resource if you want to look at kind of what type of person you are and then share that with your spouse. And I mean, maybe you can get your kids to do it too. And if your kids are a little older, it'd be easy for them to kind of identify their own personality type and how God has uniquely equipped them. And many of us are very unique, aren't we? So let's get into the lesson and get into chapter 3. Chapter 3 of Experiencing God at Home is an overview of the Blackaby home and what it was like when they moved from where they were living to Canada. Their father, Henry Blackaby, went to go pastor a church that was really on the brink of closing, and it was really difficult, really hard. It was cold. I'm not going to read all of this to you, but there's a lot of circumstances that went into it where they had to grow as a family. In some ways, they struggled and everything else. But knowing and reading some of Henry Blackaby stuff and listening to some of his sermons and just how much of a spiritual giant he really is, I was really stunned. I was shocked by one statement that they made. These are kids writing about their own father, writing about their parents, but in this instance, particularly their father, and talking about their childhood. And I thought, man, what a blessing this really is for them to say some of the things that they did. I mean, he's not perfect. He's not a perfect man, and they reference that. There are things that he was gone a lot. He was gone in ministry, doing other things. But they said this one thing about him, Henry Blackaby, at home as a father. He wasn't overbearing, demanding, or super spiritual. And they mean that in a really good sense because, I mean, I couldn't imagine being raised by, like a spiritual giant the way that Henry Blackaby is, a pastor that everybody looks up to, that everybody reads and everybody listens to in their sermons and everything else. But what their kids said about him, he wasn't overbearing, demanding, or super spiritual. He was very spiritual, but what they're saying is that he didn't run his home exactly the same way that he ran a church. I mean, there's somewhat of a difference there. And they had a good time together. They enjoyed just being a family. He said he had a playful side that took a diabolical delight in practical jokes. And that's really one overarching theme that you see in these next two chapters, is that they just had a good time growing up. And that's so important for your own individual family. There's something, and there really is something sanctifying about that. It's not just going out and going out and bowling and going out on vacations and stuff like that. A lot of times we think of that as self-serving, but we need it. We need those moments and times where we kind of fuel back up. But when you spend time with your family, those people that God has allowed you to grow with and to spend all these years with, and those people that are closer to you than anybody else on the face of the earth, when you do things that are just fun with your family, when you enjoy the time that you have with them, God does a really special sanctifying work in your family. And I think that there's something really spiritual about that. There's something that God really uses for His glory when kids can grow up and they can say, you know what, I just love being a part of our family. I got good memories of growing up and spending time with my mom and dad, and I got good memories of us going on vacation and us goofing around and having fun. So, especially maybe in these times of quarantine, it'd be good to ask the question for all of us. I mean, when's the last time we just stopped what we were doing, put our phones down for a little while, and we had a dance party in the living room? Or when's the last time you went outside to try to go catch frogs, or do something together as a family that maybe is maybe some people would say it's just a waste of time, but it's something you're doing with your kids that they just enjoy and that they're going to go back to and just remember. I hope and pray, maybe when our kids grow up and they ask questions about this whole quarantine thing, maybe they've got good memories from these past several weeks and going on a couple of months. Maybe they'll have good memories they can go back to and say, we just had a good time as a family. There's something really, really special about that. So Henry Blackaby, though, when he went, they moved off to Canada to to help restart a church, basically. And God blessed their efforts through that. It was a family affair. Everybody's involved in that, in helping to get that church back on the ground. And then what ended up happening was Henry Blackaby wrote Experiencing God, and his ministry exploded. And so at some point in time, they started having a lot more people come to them, and the church grew unbelievably during those days, and a lot of good things that they wrote about in chapter 3 that were just blessings that their family got to experience together. But there were difficult days. They write about one particular time where their mother almost passed away from, almost lost her life in childbirth of their baby sister, and turns out she turned out okay, but it was very serious, and it was a very daunting moment. And one thing that they quoted their father, he's always said this: bring your troubles to God and your faith to the people. And he's lived that out in so many ways. If you followed Henry Blackaby's ministry and read any of his stuff, bring your troubles to God and your faith to the people. And so he kind of led his family through some very tough experiences, and their faith grew together as a family because of that. We're going to talk about that because living out your faith is so critically important in the context of family. Your kids and those that you live with, your spouse, maybe if you've got extended family that's living with you or whatever as well, but your kids especially, they notice and they see how you live your life, more so than anybody else on the face of this planet. And kids can see right through it when we're faking something or when we really mean it. And what means the most, I think, more than anything else, and I think they hit the nail on the head here in chapter 3 with this, what means the most more than anything else in helping to make sure our families are growing spiritually is to live out our faith. There needs to be action to our faith. It's not just giving lip service to the Lord. It's not just showing up to church on Sunday, although that is critically important, and that is a part of living out our faith. It's the day-to-day activities, and it's the day-to-day functions of how we respond to certain instances, certain trials or troubles that come up, how we respond in those moments that's really going to teach our kids and really going to mold and shape our families on whether or not they are going to grow in their own spiritual walk with the Lord. And so depending on the Lord, trusting in Him, no matter what happens and no matter what circumstance, that's a really key theme in chapter 3. Then they talk about how they almost became African missionaries as kids because they had, I didn't know this, Henry Blackaby, they had initially sought to go out as missionaries with the International Mission Board, I believe. They were going to go serve in Africa, but their son Richard had started to have these unexplained fainting spells, and they were already apparently approved to go to Africa and everything else. But the mission board told them to put everything on hold because of their son Richard's health. And so because of that, they shifted gears and they moved to Canada. And they were raised in Canada rather than Africa because of something that happened with their son's health. Turns out Richard was fine, and he continued some treatments based on what the issue was, but nothing was too terribly wrong with his circumstance. But I thought about that, how you can think about your own family, and you can think about how there's been twists and turns along the way. And think about where you are and how you got here. It's amazing to think, well, what if this would have changed differently? What if we would have made this decision instead of that decision? Or what if this wouldn't have happened to us? Where would we be as a family in that circumstance? And there's really no way that we can navigate that on our own. There's no way that we can really lay out this long plan of what we are expecting to happen with our family. We just have to trust in the Lord, and we have to trust in Him every step of the way, that we respond as He calls us to respond in that way when those circumstances come up. But then they pointed to Deuteronomy chapter 6, which is so critical in living out your faith and understanding how to lead your family to live out your faith. And, here's Henry Blackaby, again, one of the most profound evangelical leaders of our time, and what they have to say about their own devotional time at home is pretty interesting. They said, "Our mother attempted on many occasions to have regular family devotions with us, but with crazy schedules, Dad's traveling, and his multitudinous responsibilities with the church and its missions, we were doomed to failure." And that should be encouraging to a lot of us, I think, because the Carter family, we try to spend some time devotionally and that sort of thing, but sometimes it just don't work out. And maybe for y'all are kind of in the same boat. You try to pray together, you try to study the Bible together, especially if your kids are little. It's just difficult from time to time. And but then they really kind of reassure, they kind of show us how according to Deuteronomy chapter 6, they really did lead their family spiritually. Said, "Our father used to explain that it was more important to live out his faith for his family than to merely talk about faith from a book." Here's a man who wrote a book about how to live out your faith, but how to talk about faith from a book. He believed more lessons could be learned by implementing Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. And there is so much about our spiritual walk as a family that is experiential, that has to be, it's kind of on the job training. It has to be in action. It has to be in response to things that are happening in our lives. And so Deuteronomy 6 tells us this, that you repeat these things to your children, that you love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength. You repeat these to your children. Talk about them when you sit in your house and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Bind them as a sign on your hand, and let them be a symbol on your forehead. Write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So in the everyday circumstances of life, those are the teaching opportunities to spiritually grow our children and to grow our families. It's not just in Sunday school, although we should commit ourselves to Sunday school, to Sunday morning worship, to Word of Life on Wednesday nights is what we do at Sackett Baptist. And Miss Joy is going to post a video just after we get done here, so be sure to have your kids watch. It's just a short 20-minute video about it's the Bible lesson for tonight with Word of Life. So be sure to watch that on our Facebook page. But we know this, that it's those are extremely important circumstances, extremely important opportunities to grow our faith. But it's also really important in the day-to-day, maybe even more important in the everyday circumstances of life, to point our kids to the Lord, and to point our families to the Lord. What they said was that more than anything else, what kind of signified their spiritual walk with the Lord in their home as a child was that God was real in our home. That's how they characterized it more than anything else. And I hope and pray that that's the legacy that you and I leave behind as we think about our own individual families. You think about your own kids. You want them to go back and say it was that God was real in our home, that He was at work there, that we cared, we believed in what we were doing. And my parents tried to point me to God every single opportunity. That's so important. So there's some reflection questions or discussion questions at the end of chapter 3. And again, this is just background on their particular family for now, but there's a lot of questions that we should ask about our own circumstance. So question 1, could you discern God's activity in your home as you were growing up? Now, that Enneagram test that we talked about, it really does have a huge, what really does have a huge impact on that is our own background. What has happened to us as kids and as we were growing up, and how that has changed us and molded us into who we are today. So going back to that, could you discern God's activity in your home as you were growing up? Think about when you were a kid. And what was it like spiritually? If you could, what kinds of things did God do in your childhood home? What are the things that you can look back and you say, that was God at work there? Question 2, what did you learn about God by watching your parents? Now, that could That could be a very good thing, or that could be a very difficult thing. Maybe for some of us, we grew up in a Christian home, and our parents tried to point us to Jesus every opportunity that we could. Or for others, if you didn't grow up in a Christian home, and maybe, or even a home that was antagonistic towards the gospel, it could be very difficult spiritually, and that's gonna have an impact on how we do things today. Question 3, what place did the church have in your childhood home? I hope, for all of us, that the church is just so important, more than anything else. Not just because, I'm a pastor or whatever. I hope that my kids fall in love with the church, and they fall in love with serving Jesus. That's going to be so important for them. You've heard about PKs, preacher kids, about the struggles that they have growing up and stuff, and I don't know how to navigate all of that, but what I hope and what I pray is that they'll look back on certain things, and all that they'll see is the joy that comes from serving the Lord and serving His church. I mean, obviously there's struggles, obviously there's challenges, but we are intentional. Many times, Sarah and I are intentional about trying to teach our kids about the joy of being in the church. And when people do something nice for us, or when they do something nice for our family, we always slow down and we take time and we tell Jack, and we'll tell Maggie when she understands and when she stops being Elsa. Right now she's been Elsa for about 8 days straight. And it's difficult to talk to Maggie right now, but when we told Jack, and we'll slow down and we'll say, what, so-and-so did this for us, and they're from the church. They did this because they love us. And I hope that they grow up having a desire to be a part of the church. And so there are so many blessings that come from that. So number 4, what are you more focused on your career or on raising children right now? Are there any adjustments God wants you to make? So all of us could be at different stages, different seasons of life. How might God, number 5, how might God want to use your family for His purposes in the future? And then number 6, how will your children look back on their time growing up in your home? So we should think with the end result in mind. We should be doing what we're doing with what we expect in the end to be, and living with that expectation. All right, chapter 4 is a study about Richard Blackaby's family, which is Henry's son, and Richard and Tom, I believe, are the ones that wrote this particular book, Experiencing God at Home. So chapter 4 is a good case study of individuals in a family, looking at a marriage and seeing the personalities that go into a marriage, but then also seeing the personalities that are developed in your own children. And how amazing is it that you can have kids that are growing up in similar circumstances, same household, same parents, maybe a little bit different timing, but nonetheless similar circumstances. You can have kids that grow up in that same house, but they turn out so differently. And it's interesting to read case studies like this of how true that really is. But that's not something to really, I don't think it's anything to worry about or to fret about. That's really something to kind of rejoice in, because God's created all of us uniquely and differently for a purpose. And so it's a matter of trying to find our own uniqueness, trying to find our own personality in the midst of all of that. And they point to the fact that as far as Richard goes, their goal was not uniformity. Their goal was to allow and to pray for their kids to thrive spiritually in whatever context they feel led to go in. And it seems to happen that way in a lot of ways with the Blackaby family. All of their kids were in ministry, and then a lot of their grandkids, Henry Blackaby's grandkids, are going into ministry and studying in some sort of way, service to the Lord. So that's interesting. But they start out, Richard and Lisa, they talk about how they've been married for 30 years and hadn't always been easy. They are polar opposites. Richard grew up with a Baptist background. His wife Lisa grew up Catholic, and with that particular background, there are family dynamics that are so different, as far as Richard's mother being from the South, and I think her mother being from Canada, and there's so much socially that's so different. And that really is the truth when we think about our own families. many times we do come from very different backgrounds. And what happens when two become one and they get married and they create and they have babies and they have a family themselves, is they're creating something new and distinct, but they bring with them, all of us bring with us our past. And sometimes it's our baggage, sometimes it's the good things, but it could be traditions, it could be how we do things, who pays the bills, how we interact with each other, how we raise children, the types of disciplinary action that we use. All of those things are values that were formed and molded and shaped in us as we grew, and we bring those things into our marriage and we bring them into our families. So we can be very different. And matter of fact, going back to weddings and premarital counseling and stuff like that, that's always one thing we talk about is what sort of traditions did you grow up with? What were the values of your family, and how do you think that's going to impact this new marriage? And one of the things we always talk about. So they're just honest about how the divergent views of their own parents, they really brought some challenges for their own marriage, and that continues to be a challenge for most everybody. But then they bring up one thing that they did have that was distinct and different, in addition to where they grew up and what they believed and how they interacted with other people and how they did certain things. They said, finally, and perhaps most importantly, both our families opened this is what they had in common. Both of our families opened their presents on Christmas morning and not on Christmas Eve, as some less civilized people do. And so it's interesting. I mean, it's even things like that. Like, what are your traditions around Christmas and the holidays? You can see the differences of families in those particular moments. All right, but then they start talking about their kids, and they say this one thing about their kids. They talk a little bit about the struggles and how all of us at some point in time do have struggles in raising children. But then they say this. They said, you don't get to choose your children. You only get to choose your response to them. I think a lot of us, maybe when we think about our families before we have families, we're maybe somewhat idealistic, and we want to hope for the best, and we want to have this good picture of a good, wholesome family, and that's a wonderful aspiration to have. It's just like what we talked about last week, though. Sometimes, a lot of times, relationships are messy, and things don't always go the way we want them to go. And I love my family. I love the people that God's given to me, and Sarah and Jack and Maggie are just the biggest blessings of my life. I can't imagine life without them. But it doesn't mean it's always easy. I mean, there's always struggles. I mean, just last night, bath time is a struggle in the Carter household. That's just the season of life that we're in. I know everybody's not in the same season, but bath time was a struggle. Sarah posted about the other night how Maggie got into the bathtub and she wanted to put a shog in there. That's a frog, by the way. So she wanted a shog in the bathtub. Well, so she created it in her mind that there's a shog in the bathtub. Well, then she got upset about this shog being in the bathtub, and she started screaming and crying to get the shog out of the bathtub. Well, how do you get an imaginary shog or an imaginary frog out of the bathtub when you don't know where it is? And it's something that she just came up with, but she was legitimately concerned about it. Sarah says it's not always easy, ? Well, I don't know. It's not, right? So I think all of us, we have difficult circumstances, no matter what our season of life really is. And it's not. It's sometimes really hard, especially in these times of quarantine. You like I mentioned last week, you may love the people that you live with. You may love them a lot. But sometimes you might just kind of get tired of it, and you need to go out and do something for yourself in the middle of all of this, and it can be overwhelming. So, but I thought that was really good what they said. You don't get to choose your children. You only get to choose your response to them. And I really have to pray about that as our kids grow up, and maybe some of y'all have kids in adolescence, or maybe some that are already grown. How you navigate through all of that, I think, is critically important as they develop and turn into their own individual with their own sets of values, their own ways of responding to certain things. It seems like, that's a really, really important thing to consider, is that we can only control our response to them. So they kind of give case studies of their own individual kids. They start with their child Mike, who had he played some sports. They introduced him to other things, and he struggled in school. Had a lot of challenges in school. They said, let's say Mike never heard of the honor roll during his academic career. And so, he has his own unique challenges, but he's grown up. He's 27 now, finished college. He's he's a single adult minister, college minister at First Baptist Church in Jonesboro. Sarah says she thinks something is wrong with my connection. I'm sorry, I don't know what could be with it, but it's not going out on my end. So hopefully, if it's going out on your end, I'll edit the video afterwards and try to repost it like I did last week. So, but then his son Mike also grew up to write a book himself, and he's a minister at First Baptist Church in Jonesboro, Georgia, but had his own unique challenges. Daniel is their second child. They say this: he was born a month premature, but that's the only thing he ever did early. So all of us all of our kids are different, and I know your kids may be different as well. And they all struggle with their own particular issues. Their daughter Carrie, she's has been different as well. They say that Carrie is our family's health nut. She would rather endure a waterboarding interrogation than eat a donut or drink a soda. So again, all of our kids, no matter our family context, all of our kids are so different. And I can see that just in Jack and Maggie too, as young as they are. Maggie responds very differently than Jack did. Jack responds differently than Maggie does to certain things, and they have different interests. I used to joke with Sarah when we found out that we were having a daughter, having a girl. I told Sarah, I said, it's going to be funny when we have a girl and she comes out and she's a tomboy and she just wants to get out and play outside and do all this other stuff, because Sarah likes to get her nails done and hair done and all that stuff. And turns out Maggie is a diva, and she's the complete opposite of a tomboy. So Sarah won that round, and loves to have her nails painted and all that stuff. Jack's all boy. He likes to get outside. He likes to play. He likes to ride around on a scooter. He likes to pretend. He's very he has a great vivid imagination. We were talking about yesterday just how both of our kids have a vivid imagination. Yeah, Bridget, she is totally diva. Yep. And but it's so funny, and the things that Jack's interested in is different than Maggie. We've tried to just play around with a few different things. Jack kind of liked baseball, and maybe he'll play it again, but he really loved basketball, and I don't know where that came from, but he fell in love with basketball when he started playing at First Baptist this year. And I don't have a sporty bone in my body, but just how different all of our kids can be. I think as parents, it's so important for us to kind of identify those things and just hone in on them and just kind of celebrate who they are and allow them to have the opportunity to grow in those things. And obviously pointing them back to Scripture and back to the Lord is important. But then, as they grow up, figuring out how they can use their own interests and use their own good qualities to serve the Lord in that capacity. What is it that they do well, and how can they do that well for the glory of God? That really is the question that should be on our heart as a family. So, the things that they enjoy, the things that they love, how can they utilize that? How can that be honed in for them to grow in that and to use that for God's glory? So It's interesting. You don't know how these things are always going to end up. You don't know how your kids are going to turn out in the midst of it, in the middle of a process. You hope and you pray for the best. But we really don't know, what the end result is going to be. By the way, I think it's the same thing when we have grandkids, or you have other people that are growing up that are under your influence. I think no matter what season of life that they're in, you try to meet them there. You try to meet them in that season and walk through that season with them. Experience the things that they're experiencing. Live life a little bit through their eyes. And it's in those moments that we'll really be able to see how we can meet a spiritual need in their life, how we can guide them spiritually, and answer questions that they may have about the Lord and about God's plan for their life. So it's not a matter of us just simply knowing who we are; it's knowing who they are and pouring everything that we can into them. So they list a few family principles that they have as a family, things that they really value together as a family. One is to trust God throughout the process. They say, Lisa and I do not hold ourselves up as parenting experts. We made far too many mistakes to see ourselves that way. And I think that's true for all of us. Man, if we think that we've got this all figured out and if we think we got it all together, I think we're fooling ourselves, because this whole thing, as far as leading our families, there's all these principles in the Bible, of course, that we go back to. But when it actually happens, and when circumstances actually come up, all of us are on the job training in so many ways. The second thing, keep the rules few but negotiable. And I said we did a couple of pretty unorthodox things as parents. Perhaps one of the most controversial is that we had very few rules. I think that's helpful to just have a clear and concise set of rules for them to follow, things that your kids are going to grow to value these things. They know that those few things are so critically important for you as a family. And they bring out a good point. They say it's been said that it was when ancient Rome had the most laws that its society was most corrupt. That could be true for our family too. Just because we have a bunch of rules doesn't mean that we're all following it and that we're all trying to pursue living up to those rules. Number 3, respect and support family members. This was non-negotiable. If your sister was competing in an ice skating competition, you better be there. If your son's rock band was performing in a downtown cafe, you had to show up. I think that's good. I think it's so important for kids especially to know that somebody's got your back, somebody's in your corner, somebody's going to be celebrating you when it's your time to be able to do what you feel led to do and that you enjoy doing. Your family's going to be there for you. There's something deeply profound and spiritual about that. That God brings a family together and He gives you a foundation and a base that is unlike any other, a support network that you cannot get anywhere else. That's what we need in our homes. That's what we need in our families. So that was one thing they focused on. Another thing, church is not an option. Said there were lots of options in our home. Bedtime, as our kids got older, was one, but going to church was not. And I agree with that 110%. There are so many times when, as a youth pastor or as a pastor, I think this is so important for us to embrace. Our kids need to see that we value church, and church should not be an option. We need to lead our children in this, and they'll get used to it. Especially if you start them out young, they'll just know that there's really nothing different. There is nothing different about how they live their lives. Jack and Maggie's been going to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, literally before they can remember. And it was, I don't know, I guess a month or so after they were born. But that's just the way it's been. That's our rhythm of life. And they've never really questioned that. There's been times when it's difficult. Sarah says that will leave you with the life message that you matter to someone. And that's true. I think that really does mean a lot for individuals in the family to know that you do matter to other people. And I agree with Sarah. The Kirsch family does that so well, and they support each other. They're there for each other. But yeah, with church, it really shouldn't be an option, and that may be difficult at times, but it should be non-negotiable, because this is one thing where we should lead our families in. Now, it's difficult to it may be difficult to do that, and it's especially difficult to implement that retroactively. And what I mean by that is if it's not in your regular habit of doing things, and your kids kind of grew up with that, and you try to go back later on as they've grown up and you try to instill it in them there, it might be pretty difficult, and there might be a really significant challenge. But I think you want them to enjoy it. You want them to love it. You want them to grow to enjoy it. So find a good church family. Find a good church home, with people that you love and people that support you and your family, that teach the Bible, that preach it unashamedly, and a good support network there where your kids are going to grow in the knowledge and admonition of the Lord. Nurture and admonition of the Lord is what we're told. I like this example. They said, though, at one point when Daniel was struggling as a young teen, he was reluctant to begin going to weekly youth events at church on Wednesday evenings. We brought him to the church, and he sat in the minivan in the parking lot for the first week, but he was there. I think that's good. I think that all of us need to have that sort of dedication and determination to get our kids in church. Number 5, don't be too proud to get all the help you can get, and asking other families to help. The phrase is, it takes a village. It does take a village, especially spiritually speaking. It takes a village. Number 6, we focused on what mattered. And this is going to be different for every family, because I think of different dynamics that are included with every family. But they said, one thing that wasn't really important to them was making sure that their rooms were clean at all times. They wanted it to be decent, but they said, unless we were prepared to engage him in a daily battle about making his bed and putting the clothes on the floor into the laundry, it wasn't going to happen. And they decided to pick their battles. So all of us, we have to do that in any relationship, but they decided with their own family, with their own kids, to choose to focus on what mattered. They said, but do you know what? Daniel never did drugs or smoked or drank alcohol. He played on 2 different worship teams and became a leader in his youth group once we convinced him to end his boycott in the parking lot. So what really mattered? What really mattered? That he made his bed every day, or that he loved going to church and keeping his body clean of unhealthy stimulants? I think that's something we all have to consider, and we all have to really wonder about in our own families, how that implicates things in our own lives, to focus on what really actually does matter and pointing our kids to Jesus. Number 7, we sought to create a home of joy. We determined that if our children were to wholeheartedly embrace our faith, it would be because our faith and lifestyle were a lot of fun. And again, that goes back to the point that we should have fun together as a family. Hopefully they have good memories. Kids have good memories of growing up in a family that loved each other, that loved the Lord, that cared about His church, that served other people, and they had fun. They had fun while they were doing it. So in closing, there's, again, I don't want to drag on for past an hour, but in closing, there's some other reflection questions and discussion questions. I'm going to post a poll like I did last week, so I'd encourage you to just respond to that poll, and you can post on the Facebook group as well if you'd like to. That'd be great. And to respond to different things, especially if you take that Enneagram test and you find out what type you are. I'd love to read about what types people are that are in the group, and how that changes the family dynamics in your home, and how God can use that for His glory. But here's some closing reflection questions. How are you and your spouse different from each other? How has that been good for your children, and what challenges has that caused? I think that's so important for every single one of us, because when I think about my family here at the Carter house, Sarah and I are different, and we're different in how we respond and interact with the kids, and we both bring something different in parenting. We both have different strengths that we offer to our kids, and our kids need that in a lot of ways. And I think God equips families to do that. Bridget's a type 3 competitive achiever. No, Bridget. So, how are you different from one another? How are you alike? What are some challenges? And how has that been good for your children? Number 2, list the top 3 rules in your home. Should those be the most important? Are you missing something? That we decided. We went through a parenting class a few years ago, and it was with our church at Bellevue, and with the parenting class, they talked about just outlining 3 rules, 3 simple things. Ours, as a family, were to be respectful, to be kind, and to be a helper. As little kids, I mean, that's important for them to learn. 3 significant areas where they need to grow in. And it just kind of was broad enough to apply to a wide variety of circumstances. So we haven't really brought that up here recently, and we need to. We need to drive it home more. But 3 rules that are in your house that your kids should grow to value. Number 3, how are your children currently responding to your home's rules? Does God want you to make some adjustments in how you respond? Number 4, is there joy in your home? Man, that's so important. I know that times can get chaotic, and I know at times things can be frustrating, and there are circumstances that are beyond all of our control. But overall, would you describe your home as a joyful place? Is it a place that your kids and your spouse love to come home to, or is it a place that they kind of dread, that they really are having a hard time with? And maybe it's not, abuse or anything like that, but just overall, I mean, do they enjoy being at home? Do they find joy in the relationships with the people that they have in their home? That's something that all of us really, really need to think about. Number 5, are any of your children currently rebelling against something in your home? If they are, what are they reacting to? That's going to be real critical to figure out how we navigate through that as a family, is to know what they're rebelling against and maybe why they're turning against those things, what led them to that point. And figuring out what to do about it and how to pray for the Lord's direction in that. One thing I know is this, and we talked about last week, it's no family is perfect. All of us struggle. All of us have our own issues, our own problems. And we're not always going to get it right, no matter how hard we try. I mean, even trying to, read through this book and study up on what it means to experience God in our homes. The reality is that we are going to fall short in some areas. Jack and Maggie, they're going to grow up one day and they may say, I hope they say it was a joyful house, a joyful home to live in. But they're also going to look back on some things and they're going to say, I wish Mama didn't do that, or I wish Daddy didn't do that. And they're going to change their families based on those things. And that's all right. That's human nature. That's the world that we live in. But overall, it really comes down to this: pouring our hearts out into our homes and giving the reins over to Jesus and just saying, God, would you lead us through this? And we want to grow together as a family. And we want to experience you in all of your power and in a way that only God can come in and change our home. That's what we pray. I pray for homes that are guided by the Holy Spirit in everything that they do. And God will get the glory from that. All right, well, let's interact on Facebook and everything else, and feel free to share this video, and look forward to being back with you next Wednesday.